Princess Valara's diplomatic vessel came through the jump gate trailing smoke and sparks. The elegant ship that once gleamed like polished silver now limped through space like a wounded bird. Inside Frontier Station 7's main repair bay, Derek Hammond looked up from the engine he was rebuilding and let out a low whistle. He'd been working as the station's lead mechanic for 5 years now, and he'd seen plenty of banged-up ships come through those bay doors. But this one was special. This was Corinthian royalty, and their ships didn't just break down. Derek wiped the grease off his hands with an old rag and walked over as the vessel settled onto the landing platform with a groan of stressed metal. The airlock hissed open, and out stepped the most unusual sight he'd seen in months. Princess Valara stood about 6 feet tall, her skin shimmering with that characteristic blue-silver tone that marked her species. She wore elaborate robes that probably cost more than Derek made in a year, but her eyes held something he recognized immediately. Exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying weight nobody else could see. Behind her came a whole parade of advisors and attendants, all fussing and chattering in their native tongue. Derek approached with his diagnostic pad and offered a simple nod. Some of the advisors looked at him like he was dirt on their boots, but Valara met his eyes and nodded back. There was something grateful in that gesture, like she appreciated being treated normal for once. Derek got to work immediately. The damage was worse than it looked from the outside. Someone had taken shots at this ship, and recently too. Scorch marks from plasma weapons decorated the hull plating. He crawled underneath the vessel with his tools, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of diagnosis and repair. That's when he heard the voices. They were speaking in standard Galactic now, probably assuming the human mechanic wouldn't pay attention or care. Valara's voice carried a tone of barely controlled frustration. One of her advisors was explaining, yet again, why the latest marriage arrangement had fallen through. House Mordian had reviewed her genetic profiles and found her unacceptable. The words cut through the repair bay like knives. Defective markers. Genetic liability. Unsuitable for breeding. Derek's hands stilled on the wrench he was holding. He'd heard some cold things in his time, but talking about a person like they were faulty equipment hit different. The advisor continued in that clinical tone. This was the 4th family to reject her. The Emperor was growing impatient. Perhaps the princess should consider a medical treatment, even if it carried risks. Anything to correct her unfortunate condition. Derek heard Valara's response, and it made his chest tight. She asked, very quietly, what the point was of fixing something nobody wanted in the first place. The advisors left her then, probably to go file reports or send messages or do whatever royal attendants did. Derek stayed under the ship, giving her privacy. He heard her footsteps moving toward the cargo bay area. Heard the way her breathing changed. She was crying, trying to stay quiet about it, but crying nonetheless. He wanted to leave her alone, really he did. But then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. One of the cargo support beams was cracked, probably from the same attack that had damaged the ship. The weight distribution was all wrong. He'd flagged it for repair but hadn't secured it yet. And now, with Valara standing right there in the cargo bay, he watched the stress indicators on his pad spike into the red. Derek didn't think. He just moved. He rolled out from under the ship and sprinted toward the cargo bay entrance. The beam gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Valara looked up, her eyes wide with shock as a half-ton of structural support came down at her. Derek hit her like a linebacker, wrapping his arms around her waist and throwing them both sideways. They crashed into a stack of cargo containers as the beam slammed into the deck plating where Valara had been standing seconds before. Derek felt something tear in his shoulder, felt the hot rush of blood soaking into his shirt. But they were alive. Valara lay beneath him, staring up with those enormous violet eyes. She was searching his face like she was trying to solve an impossible equation. Derek realized he was still holding onto her and quickly rolled away, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. She sat up slowly, her voice shaking. "You saved me. Why would you do that?" Derek looked at her like she just asked why water was wet. "Because that beam was gonna crush you." Didn't really seem complicated. But as he watched her expression shift from shock to something else entirely, he realized that maybe for her, for someone who'd been told her whole life she was defective and unwanted, someone risking something for her was actually pretty complicated after all. The medical bay on Frontier Station 7 wasn't exactly built for royalty. The beds were standard issue, the walls were that boring gray color that every space station seemed to favor, and the whole place smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Derek sat on one of those beds while a medical drone stitched up the gash on his shoulder. He'd waved off the human doctor, insisting it wasn't that bad. Just a scratch, really. The doctor had given him that look that said she'd seen too many mechanics downplay their injuries, but she'd let the drone handle it. Derek was surprised when the door slid open and Princess Valara walked in. She was alone this time, no advisors trailing behind her like she was some kind of parade float. She looked nervous, clutching something wrapped in cloth against her chest. She glanced around the medical bay like she wasn't quite sure she was allowed to be there. "Hey," Derek said, giving her an easy smile. "You doing all right? That was quite a scare back there." Valara nodded quickly, then held out what she'd been carrying. "I brought you food. Human food. I asked the station directory what humans eat when they are injured, and it directed me to the supply depot." Derek unwrapped the cloth and had to bite back a laugh. She'd brought him 3 tubes of industrial coolant paste and what looked like a packet of hull sealant. The stuff was definitely not food, but the fact that she tried made something warm settle in his chest. "That's really thoughtful," he said carefully, setting the items aside. "But this is actually stuff we use for ship repairs. Human food looks different. Tell you what, when I get out of here, I'll show you the cafeteria. They make a pretty decent grilled cheese sandwich." Valara's face flushed a darker shade of blue, embarrassment clear in her expression. "I apologize. I should have known better. I am useless at even simple tasks." "Hey, no," Derek said firmly. "You've never had to learn about human food before. That's not useless, that's just not knowing something yet. Big difference." She looked at him like he'd just said something profound, then slowly sat down in the chair next to his bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Derek had learned in his years working with different species that sometimes silence was okay. Let people work up to what they needed to say. Finally, Valara spoke. "Why did you risk yourself for me? You do not know me. I am nothing to you." Derek considered that. "You're a person who was about to get hurt. That's all I needed to know. Where I come from, that's just what you do. You help people when they need it." "Where you come from," Valara repeated softly. "That must be a very different place than where I come from." And then, like a dam breaking, she started talking. She told him about being the 7th daughter of the Corinthian emperor. About how Corinthian society valued telepathic ability above almost everything else. About how she'd been born without that gift, and how that single fact had defined her entire existence. She told him about the genetic screenings, the medical evaluations, the constant reminder that she was less than what she should be. Derek listened, really listened. He didn't interrupt or try to offer quick solutions. He just let her talk. She told him about the 4 families who'd rejected her marriage proposals. House Tremian had reviewed her genetic profile and sent back a 2-word response. Unsuitable match. House Vorith had been more diplomatic, but the message was the same. House Keldrith had actually started the bonding negotiations before someone discovered her condition and everything fell apart. And now House Mordian, the latest rejection, except this time they'd made sure everyone knew exactly why they were refusing. Defective genetics. Risk to the bloodline. A liability to any house that accepted her. "My father is running out of options," Valara said quietly. "And I am running out of value. A princess who cannot form telepathic bonds, who cannot contribute to the genetic strength of an alliance, who cannot even manage the basic functions of our society. I heard one of the court advisors say it would have been kinder if I had never been born." Derek felt anger flash through him, hot and fierce. "That's garbage. Complete garbage." Valara looked startled by his vehemence. "Listen," Derek continued, "I've got a story too. My family back on Earth, they're wealthy. Old money, the kind that comes with expectations. My father's a corporate lawyer, my mother sits on 3 different company boards, my older brother just made partner at some big firm in New Chicago. They had my whole life planned out before I could walk. Best schools, right degree, proper career." He gestured around the medical bay with his good arm. "I was supposed to be arguing cases in climate-controlled boardrooms. Instead, I'm fixing ships on a frontier station that most people back home have never heard of. You know what my father said when I told him I wanted to work with my hands? He said I was wasting my potential. Said I was an embarrassment to the family name. Haven't talked to him in 3 years." Valara was watching him intently now. "But here's the thing," Derek said. "I can take an engine that's completely dead and bring it back to life. I can look at a ship that everyone else has given up on and find a way to make it fly again. I can solve problems that the fancy engineers with their degrees can't figure out because I know how things actually work, not just how they work in theory. That's not wasted potential. That's just different potential." He met her eyes. "You're not defective, Valara. You're just different from what they expected. And maybe, just maybe, what they expected isn't the only thing that has value." Valara sat very still. A single tear traced down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. No one has ever said anything like that to me before. Then you've been talking to the wrong people, Derek said simply. The door opened and Valara's advisors appeared, their expressions tight with disapproval at finding her alone with the human mechanic. As she stood to leave, Derek called out, "Hey, Valara? That offer about the grilled cheese still stands. Maybe you can tell me about those quantum drive systems your ships use. I'd love to learn." She turned back, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It transformed her entire face. Derek found Valara in the observation deck 2 days later. She was standing by the large viewport, watching ships come and go from the station. Her posture was different than before, less rigid, but there was still something heavy about the way she held herself. He'd been thinking about what she'd told him in the medical bay, turning it over in his mind while he worked. And he'd come to a decision that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably insane. "Got a minute?" he asked, walking up beside her. Valara turned, and her face brightened when she saw him. "That was new. Derek. How is your shoulder?" "Good as new. Mostly." He flexed it to prove the point, only wincing a little. "Listen, I've been thinking about your situation. And I might have an idea. It's kind of crazy, but hear me out." She tilted her head, curious. "I am listening." Derek took a breath. "Here went nothing. What if I married you?" Valara stared at him. Several emotions crossed her face in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been hope before she crushed it down. "I do not understand. Is this a human joke?" "No joke," Derek said. "Look, you need a marriage to satisfy your family's political requirements, right? And from what you've told me, the main thing they care about is the alliance it creates. Well, marriages between humans and other species have been happening more and more since we joined the galactic community. And apparently, we've got some kind of reputation now. Military prowess, adaptability, all that stuff." Valara was still staring at him like he'd grown a second head. Derek pressed on. "It would be a marriage of convenience. You get the political cover you need, your family gets an alliance with humanity, and nobody has to worry about genetic compatibility or telepathic abilities because that's not how humans work anyway. I wouldn't ask anything from you except honesty. We'd be friends who happen to be married on paper." "But what would you gain from this?" Valara asked quietly. "There must be something you want." Derek shrugged. "I get a friend. And maybe you could teach me about those quantum drive systems for real. I wasn't kidding about wanting to learn. Plus, it would really annoy my father, which is just a bonus." A small smile tugged at Valara's lips at that last part, but it faded quickly. "Derek, this is kind. Too kind. But you do not understand what you would be involving yourself in. My family, the court politics, the expectations." "So explain it to me," Derek said simply. "We'll figure it out together." Valara looked out at the stars again. "My advisors would never agree to this." "Your advisors are desperate," Derek pointed out. "You go back home with another failed engagement, what happens then?" Valara's silence was answer enough. Over the next week, Derek found himself in the strangest series of meetings he'd ever experienced. Valara's advisors were horrified by the proposal at first. A human mechanic? Someone with no title, no lands, no political connections? It was unthinkable. But as Derek had predicted, desperation made people think about the unthinkable. The Corinthian court was contacted. There were transmissions back and forth, voices raised in anger and confusion. But slowly, surprisingly, approval came through. The humans had proven themselves valuable allies in recent conflicts. Their unpredictable nature and fierce loyalty made them desirable partners. And perhaps most importantly, this marriage would require no genetic compatibility assessments, no telepathic bonding requirements. It sidestepped all the issues that had made Valara unmarriageable in Corinthian society. The ceremony was scheduled for the following week. It would be small, held in the station's multi-faith chapel, a room designed to accommodate the various religious and cultural practices of the dozens of species that passed through Frontier Station 7. Derek spent the days leading up to it finishing the repairs on Valara's ship and trying not to think too hard about what he was doing. The night before the ceremony, he was in his workshop when Valara found him. She watched him work for a moment before speaking. "You can still change your mind. No one would blame you." Derek looked up from the piece of metal he was shaping. "I'm not going to change my mind. Are you having second thoughts?" "I am terrified," Valara admitted. "But not of marrying you. I am terrified that this will not work. that somehow I will ruin this too. Derek set down his tools and walked over to her. Listen to me. You haven't ruined anything. The system you grew up in is broken, not you. There's a difference. The ceremony itself was awkward in all the ways that mattered and kind of perfect because of it. Station Commander Patricia Wells officiated, reading from a standard Union contract that had been modified to include both human and Corinthian elements. Valara wore simpler robes than usual, deep blue that made her skin shimmer. Derek wore the cleanest jumpsuit he owned, which had made the commander raise an eyebrow, but Valara had smiled when she saw it. There were no crowds, no grand celebrations. Just Valara, Derek, Commander Wells, and a handful of witnesses required by both their cultures. When it came time for the exchange of tokens, Derek pulled out a ring he'd made in his workshop. It was simple titanium, shaped and polished by hand. He'd worked on it for 3 nights, getting every detail right. I didn't know what kind of jewelry Corinthians wear, Derek said as he held it up. So I made something that would last. Titanium doesn't corrode, doesn't break easily. It's strong. Figured that was appropriate. Valara's hand trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. She stared at it for a long moment, and Derek saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. It is perfect, she whispered. The commander pronounced them married according to the laws of both the United Human Systems and the Corinthian Empire. There was no kiss, as that wasn't part of Corinthian tradition, but Valara took Derek's hand and squeezed it. Her skin was cooler than his, and her grip was surprisingly strong. They walked back to Derek's quarters together afterward. He'd spent the morning cleaning, which for a mechanic meant shoving most of the clutter into closets and hoping nobody looked too closely. The space was small, just a bedroom, a tiny bathroom, and a living area that doubled as a kitchen. Nothing like what Valara was used to. So, Derek said, suddenly feeling awkward. The bed's yours. I'll take the couch. It's actually pretty comfortable. I've fallen asleep there plenty of times. Valara looked at the bed, then at Derek, then at the couch. You would give me your bed? Well, yeah. You're my wife now. Sort of. And you're a guest. That's just basic courtesy. That night, Derek made up the couch with blankets and a pillow. He was almost asleep when he heard Valara's voice from the bedroom, soft and wondering. Derek? Thank you. For all of this. For seeing me. Anytime, Valara, he called back. Sleep well. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the hum of the station around them, and wondered what exactly he'd just gotten himself into. But when he thought about the way Valara had smiled when he'd placed that titanium ring on her finger, the way something had lifted from her shoulders during the ceremony, he figured it was probably worth finding out. The first month of marriage was nothing like Valara had imagined marriage would be. Then again, she'd never really imagined a marriage that wasn't built on political necessity and cold genetic calculations. Derek treated her like a partner from day one, and it threw her completely off balance in the best possible way. He'd wake up early, make coffee in that ancient machine he swore made the best brew in the station, and ask her opinion on the day's repair schedule. At first, Valara thought he was being polite, just making conversation. But then she realized he actually wanted her input. When she mentioned that the power fluctuations in Bay 3 might be related to the quantum resonance patterns she'd noticed, Derek grabbed his tools and asked her to show him what she meant. They spent that whole afternoon tracing energy signatures through the station's systems. Derek would point to a component and ask how it worked. Valara would explain the theory, and Derek would nod and then show her the practical application, how the actual mechanisms function versus how they were supposed to function according to the manuals. They made a good team. She understood the science, he understood the reality. Together, they solved problems neither could have tackled alone. Word spread through the station about the odd couple. The human mechanic and his alien princess bride became something of a novelty. Most people were kind about it, curious but respectful. Others weren't so generous. Valara overheard 2 Talaxian traders in the corridor one day, speaking loudly enough that she knew they intended for her to hear. That's the defective one, isn't it? The Corinthian royal who can't even manage basic telepathy. I heard she had to marry a human because no proper house would take her. The other Talaxian laughed. Well, humans will take anyone, won't they? No standards at all. Valara kept walking, head held high, but the words stung. They always did. What she didn't see was Derek coming around the corner behind her, a wrench still in his hand from the repair job he'd been working on. Hey, Derek called out, his voice carrying that edge it got when he was truly angry. You two got something to say? The Talaxians turned, and their expressions shifted when they saw the look on Derek's face. We were just making conversation, one of them said dismissively. No, you were being disrespectful about my wife, Derek said, walking closer. Let me tell you something about standards. My wife can calculate quantum trajectories in her head while you're still trying to figure out which end of the wrench to use. She's fluent in 7 languages. She repaired a power conduit last week that 3 certified engineers said was beyond fixing. So maybe you want to rethink what the word defective means before you use it again. The Talaxians muttered something and hurried off. Derek stood there for a moment, breathing hard, then turned to find Valara watching him from down the corridor. She'd stopped walking when she heard his voice. There were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. 3 weeks into the marriage, a formal delegation arrived from the Corinthian Empire. Valara's stomach dropped when she saw the diplomatic vessel dock. She knew what this was. An inspection. They'd come to verify that the marriage was legitimate and not just some scheme to avoid responsibility. The lead diplomat was a tall Corinthian named Lord Theron, and he looked at Derek like something he'd scraped off his boot. The inspection was brutal. They questioned every aspect of the marriage, demanded to see living arrangements, asked invasive questions about their relationship. Throughout it all, Derek remained calm, answering honestly and without embarrassment. Then Lord Theron made his pronouncement. This union cannot stand. The princess remains genetically defective, which means any marriage bond is invalid under traditional law. We will be taking her back to Corinthia to arrange a proper match. That's when Derek lost his temper. Not in a violent way, but in that particularly human way where passion and conviction overrode every sense of diplomatic caution. Invalid. Derek stepped forward, and even though Lord Theron was taller, he seemed to shrink back. Let me tell you what's invalid. Judging someone's worth by one single trait they can't control is invalid. Treating a person like defective merchandise is invalid. You want to know about my wife? Really know about her? Derek started ticking points off on his fingers. She's the reason we figured out that power fluctuation problem that's been plaguing this station for months. She stays up late helping me understand quantum mechanics because she knows I want to learn. She's teaching herself to cook human food even though half of it probably tastes weird to her, just because she wants to do something nice. She remembers that I take my coffee black and that I don't like to talk first thing in the morning. She laughs at my terrible jokes. She's patient and kind and brilliant. And you know what? Not once, not one single time, have I needed her to read my mind telepathically to know what she's thinking or feeling. Because she tells me. With words. Like people do. The delegation stood in stunned silence. Valara was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. Derek wasn't done. You want to declare this marriage invalid? Fine. Do it. But you're not taking her anywhere she doesn't want to go. She's not property. She's a person. And she's my wife. And I'm not going to stand here and let you tell her she's not good enough when every single day she proves she's better than your entire backward system deserves. Lord Theron looked genuinely shocked. You would defy the Corinthian Empire for a marriage of convenience. It stopped being just convenience about 2 weeks ago, Derek said quietly, and he looked at Valara when he said it. So yeah. I would. The delegation left without Valara. There would be more transmissions, more political maneuvering, but something had shifted. Lord Theron had looked at Derek with new eyes, like he was seeing humans clearly for the first time. That night, after the delegation had gone, Derek and Valara sat in the workshop together. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that only comes when 2 people are truly at ease with each other. Derek was running diagnostics on a power cell, and Valara was reading through technical manuals, helping him understand the Corinthian systems better. You didn't have to do that, Valara said suddenly. Defend me like that. It could cause problems for you. Derek looked up from his work. Valara, you're my wife. Of course I'm going to defend you. But the marriage was just supposed to be for convenience. For politics. Derek set down his tools and turned to face her fully. Is that still what you want it to be? Valara met his eyes. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm against hers, rough from years of working with machinery. No, she said softly. I do not think that is what I want anymore. Derek smiled, that crooked smile that made her heart do strange things. Good. Because somewhere along the way, I started actually caring about you. Not as a political arrangement or a friend I'm helping out. Just you. As you are. Valara squeezed his hand tighter. For someone who'd spent her whole life being told she was incomplete because she couldn't share thoughts telepathically, she was finding that words worked just fine. Sometimes, they worked even better. The news traveled fast through diplomatic channels, the way gossip always does when it's interesting enough. A human mechanic had stood up to a Corinthian diplomatic delegation and defended his alien wife with the kind of passion usually reserved for war declarations or epic poetry. Within a week, the story had spread to a dozen systems. Within 2 weeks, it was everywhere. Derek found the whole thing embarrassing. He just said what needed to be said, nothing more. But Valara explained to him that in a galaxy where most marriages were cold political arrangements, where genetic profiles mattered more than actual people, what he'd done was revolutionary. He treated her like she had value simply because she existed, not because of what she could offer politically or genetically. To many species who'd been watching humanity's rapid rise in galactic society, it confirmed something they'd suspected. Humans were different. They operated on principles that didn't always make logical sense but somehow worked anyway. The attention brought both good and bad. Ships started specifically requesting Derek for repairs, wanting to meet the mechanic who defied an empire for love. Derek still insisted it wasn't that dramatic, but Valara would just smile and let him believe that. The bad part came in the form of an official summons transmitted directly from the Corinthian imperial court. Princess Valara was commanded to return home immediately. The emperor had arranged a proper marriage for her with Lord Kethrian of House Volvis, a minor noble who was willing to overlook her genetic deficiencies in exchange for the political advantages of a royal connection. The marriage to the human was declared a temporary arrangement that had served its purpose. It was time for Valara to return to her duties. Derek found Valara in their quarters, staring at the official summons on her datapad. She looked smaller than he'd ever seen her, like the weight of her entire world was pressing down on her shoulders again. "So," Derek said carefully, sitting down next to her. "What do you want to do?" "It does not matter what I want," Valara said quietly. "This is a direct command from the Emperor. From my father." "It always matters what you want," Derek countered. "Look, I know what we agreed to at the start. This was supposed to be temporary, just to get your family off your back. If you want to go, if you think this Lord Kethrian guy might actually be decent, then I'll understand. I'll be sad about it, not going to lie. But I'll understand." Valara turned to look at him, and there were tears tracking down her face. "You would let me go? Just like that?" "I want you to be happy," Derek said simply. "Even if that means being happy somewhere else with someone else. You deserve a real chance at a good life, Valara. Not just settling for a mechanic on a frontier station because you ran out of options." Valara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You still do not understand, do you? You beautiful, foolish human. I did not run out of options and settle for you. I found you. There is a difference." She stood up, wiping her tears away, and Derek saw something change in her posture. The princess he'd first met had carried herself with resigned dignity, like someone going through the motions of a life they'd stopped believing in. This Valara stood differently. There was strength in her shoulders, determination in her eyes. "I am going to invoke the right of personal testimony," she announced. Derek blinked. "The what now?" "It is an ancient right, rarely used. Any member of the royal family can challenge a decree by offering personal testimony directly to the emperor and the assembled court. They must listen. They cannot interrupt. And at the end, the emperor must make a judgment that takes the testimony into account." "Okay," Derek said slowly. "And what are you going to testify?" Valara smiled. "The truth." The transmission was scheduled for the following day. Commander Wells provided access to the station's main communication array, powerful enough to send a real-time signal all the way to Corinthia. Derek stood beside Valara as she prepared, and he could feel the nervous energy radiating off her. "You've got this," he told her. "Just speak from the heart." The connection established, and suddenly they were looking at the imperial court of Corinthia. It was overwhelming, hundreds of nobles and officials assembled in a massive chamber that looked like it was carved from a single piece of crystal. On a raised dais sat Emperor Valen himself, Valara's father, looking stern and ancient and utterly unmoved. Valara began to speak. Not in the formal, stilted language of court proceedings, but in simple, clear words. She told them about arriving at the station with her damaged ship and her damaged heart. About being rejected for the 4th time, about feeling like a burden and a disappointment. About crying in a cargo bay and wishing she'd never been born. Then she told them about Derek. About how he'd saved her without hesitation, without knowing who she was or what she could offer him. About how he'd sat in a medical bay and listened to her pain without judgment. About how he'd offered to marry her not because he wanted something from her, but because he wanted to give her something. Freedom. Dignity. Choice. "He asks my opinion on repairs," Valara said, and her voice was stronger now. He values my knowledge, my skills, my perspective. Not because I am a princess, but because I am competent. He defends me when others speak against me. He teaches me things and lets me teach him in return. He laughs with me. He gives me space when I need it and company when I do not want to be alone. He treats me as an equal partner in all things. She paused, and Derek saw her hand tremble slightly as she continued. You sent me to find a political alliance. Instead, I found a partnership. You wanted me to secure genetic advantages for our house. Instead, I learned that value comes from who you are, not what you can produce. You told me I was defective my entire life. He showed me I was simply different. The court was silent. Emperor Valin's expression was unreadable. I renounce my claim to the throne, Valara said, and the court erupted in shocked murmurs. I renounce my titles, my position in the line of succession, my right to royal privileges. I choose to remain with Derek as his wife, not as a political arrangement, but as a genuine marriage built on respect and partnership and affection. I choose a life working beside a mechanic on a frontier station over returning to a palace where I was never wanted. She took a breath. You can declare this marriage invalid. You can strip me of my royal status. You can exile me from Corinthian space. But you cannot make me believe I am defective anymore. Because I have seen what I am capable of when someone actually believes in me. And I will not go back to being small. The transmission hall was completely silent now. Derek reached out and took Valara's hand, squeezing it gently. She squeezed back, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a spinning universe. Emperor Valin finally spoke. You would choose this human over your own people. I choose myself, Valara said firmly. For the first time in my life, I choose what I want. And yes, that includes him. What happened next surprised everyone. Emperor Valin stood, and when he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been respect. The right of personal testimony has been fulfilled. I have heard your words, daughter. He looked at Derek for a long moment, and Derek resisted the urge to squirm under that ancient gaze. The human alliance has proven valuable to our empire. And perhaps there is value in other things we have overlooked. Your marriage is declared legitimate and binding under imperial law. Furthermore, the human Derek is recognized as prince consort, with all rights and privileges thereof. The court exploded in protest, but the emperor raised his hand for silence. A new noble line is established this day. House Valara, founded on principles of merit, skill, and character rather than genetic heritage. May it serve as a reminder that value comes in many forms. The transmission ended. Derek and Valara stood there in stunned silence, still holding hands. Finally, Derek spoke. So, I'm a prince now? That's weird. Valara laughed, actually laughed, the sound bright and free. You are impossible. Yeah, but I'm your impossible, Derek said, grinning. They returned to the workshop that evening, back to their familiar routine. Valara explained quantum theory while Derek showed her how to properly calibrate a plasma torch. She was still a princess, technically, though she'd given up most of what that meant. He was still a mechanic, despite the fancy new title nobody would probably ever use. But together, working side by side, they were building something new. Valara looked down at the simple titanium ring on her finger, the one Derek had made by hand in this very workshop. It caught the light from distant stars visible through the bay windows. It wasn't ornate or expensive or impressive by royal standards. But it was real. It was honest. It was worth more than all the political arrangements and genetic profiles in the galaxy. Thank you, she said softly, for teaching me that I was never broken. Just waiting for someone who could see me clearly. Derek smiled and handed her a wrench. Come on, princess. We've got work to do. And in a machine shop on the edge of civilized space, a princess who'd been told she was worthless and a mechanic who'd been told he was wasting his potential proved that sometimes the best things are built by hand, one honest moment at a time.